what does being in diverse rural spaces mean, and who are and what are the people doing to challenge what is happening in public schools.
This is Educating to be Human, and I'm your host, Lisa Petrides, founder of the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management in Education. In each episode, I sit down with ordinary people creating extraordinary impact, people who are challenging notions of how we learn, why we learn, and who controls what we learn. Thank you very much for listening. Welcome to Educating to be Human. Today I am joined by Kassi Talbot, and she is an educator and social justice advocate. She's a longtime teacher, having taught middle school social studies and high school Spanish, and she's currently an elementary school principal working to bring about transformative change in education in the rural coastside town of Pescadero, California, in the very community that she herself was born, raised, and educated in. So welcome, Kassi.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So here in season 2 of Educating to be Human, we've been looking at how access to knowledge and community and care, and looking at how we aspire to center this concept of humanity in learning. And I know that you are putting these kinds of ideas into action every single day, showing up in the classrooms, in the school, and in the community. So again, I'm so glad that you're here with us today to really be thinking about this concept of educating to be human, but very much, in a school community. So many folks who work in education, we end up taking jobs far away from home in another city or state, and then you need to get to know the community that you're working with. And here you've had the opportunity and the privilege to be working in the town where you, in fact, were raised and educated in. So I'd love to just hear you describe a little bit about your rural town for our listeners.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I think it's such a beautiful place. So we're on the south coast of San Mateo County, and it abrupts the Santa Cruz County. We are a town of about 800 to 1,000 folks, about 65% Latinx population, and the rest are a mix of white and other descendants, particularly like Portuguese descent. And my family would be like Irish. And what's really beautiful about it is it's either fields of the products that we grow around here. So there's a lot of organic farms. There's a lot of big farms that have like pumpkins and Brussels sprouts and artichokes. And that's what we're kind of known for, is if someone is coming to Pescadero, number one, we know if they're a tourist based on how they park, because we have one street. And if they're parallel where they should be perpendicular, or vice versa, it's very obvious that they're not from Pescadero. And if they say Duarte's, we say Duarte's Tavern with a silent E, but people say Duarte's. So if you say Duarte's, we already know that you're visiting. You're visiting Pescadero. And those are just like really cute like things about it. And at the same time, we live in a time where we're so tight knit that you really have to decide if you want to have an argument with somebody, because you're going to see them at every party and every event. So at the same time, it's greatest what someone would say a weakness, like someone always knowing about you and stuff. It can be in terms of, privacy is possible, obviously, because we have so much geospatial space between all of us, that you can have some privacy. But if you are social, many people probably know your business. But at the same time, that is one of its greatest strengths, is because people do work hard to reconnect or to understand, because you're going to see everybody at the next event. We have a yearly Pescadero Arts and Fun Festival, which is something that all of us have gone to in Chamarita, and we go, and that's where we kind of see everybody in town, is at those events that we all look forward to going to. Growing up there, I always felt that being in an urban space or being somewhere else was the goal, because everyone had so much more outside. And only really with, not even recently, but I guess when I say when I was 27 up until now, and now I'm turning 37. So just in the last 10 years, have I actually started to feel more of the opposite of seeing it as a bounty of things, even though we do need more resources, but seeing it as more bountiful rather than scarce. But growing up, it was because, social media was getting bigger, very beginning, let's say
Right.
beginning. But
Right.
so we remember switching from cursive to working on a keyboard, and we're like, oh, this is what a computer is. So growing up with tech, but when I say we, because me and my friends who are my graduating class, so I've been part of the same graduating class of Pescadero High School. We graduated in 2007, but we've been together as a group of 20, 22 people. There's actually, you'll be able to see it, but the audience won't. Like, there's a picture of them behind me. We've been together since we were 4 years old in preschool when we met each other for the first time. And coming back, we actually talk about how going to college, we all took advantage of a lot of opportunities because we didn't grow up with a million and one clubs at the school site. So rural folks are definitely major players no matter where they go, regardless of whether they came from a very isolated space or not. We have very much equal opportunity to participate and be fully able to participate academically, physically, you know.
Mhm, mhm. So, what is it like now working in this town, in the same rural town that you grew up? And now you're actually working there as you work to educate a whole new generation of students.
Well, when I was younger, it was pretty funny because the parents of my students were like probably partaking at the one bar that was still in town. Now, as a 30-year-old, I'm 30-something-year-old, I'm at home with my own with my own glass of wine. But when I was younger and teaching, we would cross paths with, our worlds really blend, in the gray area after work hours. And that still remains so, but it actually creates a really good platform for understanding. Being bilingual, me being able to speak English in Spanish is absolutely essential being in this job as a teacher and as a principal. The phone calls I make are great because they're my classmates or people that were a few years older than me, and so we have intersected. So I believe they trust me to investigate an issue or to keep them informed. Am
Mm,
I the best at it? Absolutely not. But do we have a platform of friendship to work through whatever challenges we may have? And that what I mean by challenge, we have anything that an argument that their child could be having with another child and calling me or texting me on my personal phone to let me know, like, hey, Cassie, can you check in on this? My student just told me this story. My child just told me the story, but if my child's also guilty of something, let me know. And then I loop back, a little bit later. And that makes it a very unique experience that I don't
right.
think not all admin get a chance to have.
That's right. That's right. So, I wanted to ask about that. So you're in this rural community where you know a lot of the people, you know the parents, you'll see them in town, you'll see them at, the fair or the festival in your town. So, at the same time, what have you learned about building trust and belonging among families who may feel marginalized by the education system?
Mm. I think what's great about teachers is, or at least the ones that I know, is that we never stop being the student. So I definitely had to learn, what does it mean to be me, like a white, middle class, heterosexual, English dominant speaking woman in this town, and how I show up, and can I be a good co-conspirator to the Latin Aid community? How does one do that? How will I know? Those are questions that are never answered. They're always a continual act of self-inquiry and practice. So I guess I could say, if I had to think of on the spot the evidence, if I have any evidence to say, I would say, well, I haven't been run off the job yet. Um,
Mm,
and what I had to learn, what does it mean, because we've kind of moved away in social justice work from saying safe spaces, because no human can really guarantee we can't really guarantee safety. We can only try to make brave spaces.
mm.
So when we think about making brave spaces, is how are we getting the tools to understand queer identifying students, if that's across our difference? How if it's not us, or if it's not me that can respond because a student that might be that's Latin identifying, that does not work well with white women, then not taking that to an offense at all, and say, of course, I will find you a person that can work with you. And I think some of the things that don't scare me is talk with, especially with students, is talking about race and talking about queer identities and being really open about it. And that's made students feel comfortable to come out to me, to tell me how where their identity is, how they feel about white people, because they know, they're like, she knows that there's enough history to validate a distrust of folks that are white, who they just don't know if they're going to be treated well. They're identifying
Right.
as a different race, ethnicity, and speaking a different language. So I would say I have evidence for a few of them, but I think all teachers do. They always have that one student that came back and says thank you. And in this political climate, teachers definitely would love to hear some thank yous, because it's hard to keep their morale up these days.
Yeah, speaking of these days, I really resonate with that. You know, folks who are feeling threatened in this current climate in the US, and as you said, Pescadero's has a largely Latino community. How do you talk to the community, to parents, to students, both white students as well as Latino students, about what they might do? For example, if ICE were to come to campus, like, are you actively thinking about that or talking about that in your community?
Yes, we definitely have a communication of leaders within Pescadero. So, like the admin and our local nonprofits, where we do text each other when we hear. So, because I've made some very strong connections and friendships with the Union of the California Teachers as a whole, we also, as teachers in almost like union statewide, will share information with each other about possible ICE sightings. And then I bring it to my nonprofits and my admin, and we're building what definitely is kind of a response toolkit for ourselves. Like, what if ICE were to come, this is the protocol we would follow, and then continually refreshing ourselves on that. I am overdue of doing a refresh and a training for my teaching staff. For admin, we have spoken about protocol again, but we are overdue, in my opinion, for another like community meeting and training. We did do one last spring of this year, 2025, with Faith in Action. That was a partnership between the school employees, nonprofit employees, and also a Puente de la Costa Sur was helping arrange that. And we also had some of the board members from Coast Pride come down from Half Moon Bay as well.
So, as you talk about this, I'm just really thinking about, from a leadership perspective, what does care look like in your leadership, both for the students and the teachers? Because, yeah, this is a lot that they're going through these days, right?
Care is so broad sometimes, because it's also, I think, something that well, if you can do it for yourself. And I don't know if I could answer what my care would look like, what my care looks like, but care for students and the youth and the community. I'll say one thing that I think is a thread that's coming up recently is I have these really great community liaisons, and they are two staff members that are also like very long time Pescadero residents, and they're always thinking of ways to get ahead of the curve of like
Mhm.
what's needed. So one
Mhm.
example, very concrete example, is we know that social media contact is just doom scrolling, and having social media is never, it's never a good thing for youth, right? Access to knowledge via the internet is a different conversation and a different
Right.
question that we'll come back to on this podcast. But in terms of the doom scrolling and YouTube, university through YouTube and all these things, and learning swear words and learning all these things, is also coming from parents not having the tech knowledge to put the parameters and the blocks and the timing. And no parent really wants to admit that they could be part of the problem. That it's because I don't actually know, and I'm afraid to ask for help to put parental parameters on it. I'm also the one that bought them the tech, that bought them the phone. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's a very layered, but it would behoove us, and this is what's brewing, is in that dilemma, is being like, how do we have parents understand what we know about social media contact and its dangers, and have it be like a tech workshop where we have people teaching them how to set the parameters on their phones and on their devices. That is care, because we are seeing in the classroom that, because everyone had a screen in front of them in the pandemic, that the way youth can be convinced, the way youth fall into depression, the way youth fall into body dysmorphia, the way they can get recruited into alt-right chat groups is through social media and or through gaming platforms.
Mm.
That's how they get on ramped, or that's how they fall into depression. That's how they get body dysmorphia, because of all the filters. That's care, is getting ahead of those things that you know are going to come to a head, and just start doing those workshops with families and parents. Care also is easier when you have more people at the table. So even though it seems like a big lift, like we have the Half and Bay Library doing these amazing science nights and literacy nights with us. We had just finished our conferences 2 weeks ago. Or was it really last week? Oh my God, I can't believe it feels like an eternity, but it was really so last week we just finished our conferences and we were reminiscing that 10 years ago, we didn't have conference interpreters come from Stanford, which
Mm.
we contract with interpreters from Stanford to come and interpret conferences, because the power dynamics, when parents have to use their own children to translate the meetings,
Oh, of
that
course.
power dynamic lies with the kid when it needs to stay with the parent. So, care of the child, a lot of it has to do with not only our communication, but how we are supporting parents in parenting.
Right.
Not telling them
That's
the how
beautiful.
necessarily, but giving them, like, continuing to say, "You're doing a great job. It's okay that your child's mad at you for this." Like, that
That's great.
they're supposed, because they don't know any better than in terms of that tech and that amount of time.
Right, right. That's so interesting. And I know you're thinking a lot about access, right? You're thinking about access not just to learning materials, but well, of course, to technology you've just described, but also to the opportunity to be seen and heard. And it sounds like, and I'd like to hear a little bit more, that you're really working hard to help your students and their families believe that their voice matters and that they do have some opportunity to be able to shape this world they live in. They're not just passengers, right?
Yes, even if you do come from another country to be here, you're still their first teacher, and you hold knowledge that they need to know. And it, just because it doesn't get recognized by dominant culture doesn't mean that it's less than.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm curious in a very explicit way. What does civic education look like at your school, for example?
In high school, civic education is, there's literally the class that's called civics, which is like what the
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
government class. There's actually been never a better time to be teaching politics than right now. It
mm-hmm.
is, as a former history teacher, like in the election year, that is golden year of teaching what's going on. When it comes to responsibility, kind of your question about civic teaching also makes me think of educating to be human, is about how do we actually hold, is taking history class and civics class a little bit further and say that your vote, we're in a democracy theoretically where your vote is your own vote, and at the same time it should not just be about the self, but that's also our capitalist environment. So we're a democracy, but we're also capitalist. So we tend, or at least I grew up with the narrative that you just have to think for yourself. I would like to challenge that narrative and say that civics and history classes are to actually challenge dominant narratives, to discover new ways of existing with each other. And your vote actually is for all. So your vote is not just for what would be good for you, because that's too contextual. It's like, for middle class white women who are heterosexual, I'd be voting no on a lot of things, right? Because I
Right.
have access to a lot. You're voting for all. And that is how I would like students to think about their vote, is not just what do you like? It's what would be good for your local context, for your state context, for your nation.
Ooh, that's beautiful. And I wish that's something that we were doing all the time, it seems.
But you don't think of it that way because you grow up with thing because dominant culture has a hyper fixation on the individual's journey. When people from other countries come in with a more holistic
Mm,
approach to that family balance mixed in with the individual,
of course.
and it's very beautiful. That's what I gained so much from the Latin A community is that they're the hardest working people ever. So to have the rhetoric be that they're people from the South that are like criminals and rapists and all that jazz is absolutely, absolutely bonkers and so contrary to what the actual evidence states. But growing up in hyper independent culture, being part of dominant culture myself, it was about you're leaving at 18. There is something to be said about relying on the unit and
Mhm.
actually being in tune with each other because that's the skill that's needed in the present day.
Yeah, and that really sounds like that is the culture and community that is shaping your school's learning environment, right? Because that is where they're from, that is the family, the strong family unit, and care for family and responsibility for family. I'm curious how does that show up, when you talked about democracy and a vote? Are those things that you can really teach to elementary school children? Or is that more at the high school? You talked about some, high school examples. I'm curious what that looks like at the elementary school level.
At the elementary school, we have the in our voting year last year, there we did a puente de la Costa Sur, our physical neighbor right over here, came in with a voting poll practice. So the students had to vote for whether they wanted pizza or ice cream, and then they ended up
Mhm.
getting that thing. So they created these really beautiful like poll booths, and they came in and they gave us things. So there are there are civic lessons that happen even within elementary school, but
That's
it
great.
is a foundational buildup. Some of the narratives that are actually getting challenged a little bit more instead of like the fifth grade mission project where it's
Mm,
just about how great Spanish Catholicism is for California, it's about a tandem recognition of this is colonialism with consequence to indigenous people, and that meant death. So that's not as grave as I'm saying it right now, but there's a way that the state curriculum navigates talking about indigenous people being here and not being in here in a way that's age appropriate and saying that this isn't just but when I was growing up the fifth grade the mission system was just supposed to be this like amazing holier than thou process when had no there was no negative things to say. You're like, yeah, the indigenous people they just had to cut their hair and like learn Spanish and they, gosh darn it, everyone worked so hard and did a great job on those missions. And look how beautiful they are today. Like, no, now we're recognizing these are indigenous bodies that died, were enslaved, and did this part to make this happen. And it's insulting to think that youth can't hold space for that complexity because then it
mm.
shows up as being what people might consider ignorant or unwilling to unlearn and relearn. And it's insulting. Students and adults, I would like to think, have the ability or should be gaining the ability to hold space for complex stories, multiple perspectives in one, and have that critical thinking and critical analysis of an event. It doesn't mean that one thing doesn't exist and one thing does. It means that these narratives exist at the same time and they
Right.
can be recognized. And that's not something to debate, that is truth.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to me, you've just described what it means to educate to be human, right? And how you're translating that into the daily rhythms of school life.
I would completely agree with that. Those are my big two is in educating to be human, knowing how to critically analyze multiple and diverse perspectives about an event is a skill, and to do it calmly and to do it
Right.
amicably,
Right.
it would be amazing. And then the second would be that your vote holds a responsibility and a consequence to those around you. When you're going to vote for something, it's still okay to do it as your choice. And have you done the research of what your vote's consequence reverberates in other communities? But if you don't have critical analysis skills, then you don't even think about, oh, if I'm voting for this, you almost say like, oh, what's going to happen in this area? And it's very cut and dry, but you have to ask it very specific things, especially with the rise of AI. You can actually find
Mm.
this information out a lot sooner, but you have to know how to ask the question. It's about how to be curious and how to give really good questions, how to pose really good
Right.
questions of inquiry, which is missing in our current narrative. Be like, if I vote this way, what does that mean
Mm.
for queer people? What does that mean for indigenous people?
So much of what you're talking about, I'm guessing, comes from the deep thread of education that runs through your family. Also, I understand your mom was a teacher, also a principal. How do you feel like that sort of shapes what you do today?
Oh, it makes it so much easier because she is someone I can talk to, my mom, who made it through No Child Left Behind and all
Mm,
the stress that happened and seeing brown children separated into other rooms because that was like the designated English class and like the saliently white kids or the ones that speak English dominantly are going into another one when studies show the best one is that we're mixed together, like feeding off of each other. And we have that
right.
actually co-learning each other's languages provide a better social space for us to grow as children than having us being separate threads and then having one group of kids, my group, thinking that we're better than and more than, and then having a group of kids feeling like they're less than.
Right.
But going in to talk to her, she gets to pull on her historical memory about all those
Mm,
things and then see where I'm at and be toe to toe, just in step with how I'm trying to go forward. And her being, so I'm almost able to pull from a longer and more
yeah.
distant teacher past
Mhm,
than
mhm.
just my own lifespan. And that's really invaluable.
Yeah, I love the generational wisdom being passed down, right? It's a
And
great
the
it's
debates that come from it too, like being
Mhm, mhm.
what is one plus about dominant culture and hyper independent like and being hyper independent is you get a seat at the table to debate when you hit 18 for whatever reason. And it's actually seen as a so to toot our cult to toot dominant cultures like own horn here. I'm able to debate with my father and my mother, and I don't get told to be quiet, right?
Mm,
So I get told
mm,
to be
mm, mm.
so being able to be a woman and to be loud is another set of privilege on its own to have a mother and father that love me so deeply that they're willing to unlearn and relearn. And I've seen that been going on for the past 10 years and it's just been amazing.
Great. I wanna thank you for the work that you do there, in your community. It's brave work, it's courageous work, and I hope and I think you understand how much it's valued by the community, and for those of us who are, doing other pieces of this educating to be human gargantuan task in front of us today. But the work that you're doing is really making a difference, and I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Lisa.
And my last question that I love to ask is, what is, often people say, oh, what's your favorite book? Or what's a book that you're reading right now? Or what's the name of a book you want other people to read? But I want to ask you a different question, which is, what is the name of a book that you want everyone to read, but it hasn't been written yet?
I would love to read a book on education that is about diverse rural spaces. And I would even say that the book would be that each chapter be written by a different teacher in a rural
Mm,
space, but like a racially diverse or queer teachers in spaces that would really challenge the dominant narrative of rural spaces as being backwards or small or not able to compete nationally or intellectually, but for it to be stories that would bring hope to other rural teachers. Because
so
what
important.
which is so important because building community to think that there isn't like either queer identifying or black or Latina or indigenous or a combination of all teachers in really small towns where they're not allowed to be themselves is is very true. I'm sure there are
That's
many
right.
people out there that will say we can't talk the way that you're talking in the classroom because we would be fired. So the fact that people the being who they are would be a sacrifice for of their livelihood, I think I
Right.
worded that right. If they were who they truly are and identify in the classroom, and that would mean that they would no longer have a job, that would be the absence of their livelihood. This is why are in true need of what does being in diverse rural spaces mean and who are and what are the people doing to challenge what is happening in public schools.
Love that. So, what's the name of the book?
Oh man, maybe diverse rurality. Like, um, Resistance and rural and resistance, something like that.
It's funny. We're always looking at the inner city schools and, the big city schools and these kinds of things to really see where change comes from. And I love the perspective that you've brought that talks about what does it look like in a rural school and what are those changes and what are the lessons there that can be applied to the other parts of education that often aren't, right? Rural is sort of the add-on at the end, but what if we put rural, sort of we centered that into learning and what we do? So thank you for that perspective.
Absolutely. Because when I hear inner city, I hear, wow, you must have a lot of people part
Mhm.
of your movement, right? Because to have, and that could be my bias as it comes to urban spaces, right? But
Mhm.
if there's something that's going on and it's affecting this many thousands of people, and they're all not like neighbors is a broad term, but like they're in the same area or the
Mhm.
same,
Mhm.
I see a massive potential to unify because you have so many people that would be feeling the same sentiment. Whereas with rural, you're actually trying to connect across vast geographical spaces. And how do you make someone feel like someone's going to be able to comfort them or like to comfort them when you're so far away? Like, so the
Mhm.
isolation piece
Yeah.
is like the real challenge with unifying rural spaces.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that's a great place to end. Kassi Talbot, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the show this week. This has been Lisa Petrides with Educating to be Human. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can access our show notes for links and information on our guests, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, at edu2behuman. That is EDU to be human. This podcast was created by Lisa Petrides and produced by Eleni Theros. Educating to be Human is recorded by Nathan Sherman and edited by Ty Mayer, with music by Orestes Kaletsos.